Happy coding.
Hello there, Kevin here with the next video in our Intro to Web Development series. I'm just going to dive right in, I think. So, last week, or whenever you watched the last video or went through the last tutorial, you've been learning about HTML, which is the language that's the fundamental building block of the web, of the internet, and it lets you specify content. So I'm going to just jump over to my glitch editor so I can like talk through HTML. I'm in glitch. I have my editor open to a new project with some placeholder text, and I've got my code here on the left and my resulting web page over here on the right. So HTML is the fundamental building block of the web, of the internet, and it lets you specify content. So for example, I've got this h1 tag, which specifies a header element or a heading element. And I've got this p tag, which specifies a paragraph element. And it shows up like this. So the website knows, or the browser knows, how to display these different types of content, and it has some default styling. So I've got, a default font here. The heading element is rendered kind of bigger and bolder. The paragraph element, is just like black on white. The background color is just white. So there's these default, styles. And that's kind of where we left it. So HTML is about the content itself. Like, what type of content do you want the browser to display? HTML isn't really about what it looks like. You can kind of get at, different like sizes if you use different like headings, and there are some tags that do, change how it looks, but really HTML's job is to specify the type of content, not to really specify what that content looks like. So if you want to specify what it looks like, you're going to use a different language called CSS, which is cascading style sheets. And that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to run through adding CSS to our page and styling the elements in our page with CSS. So the best way to get started is to, just get started, I guess. So I'm going to sort of work through things in an order. I've got stuff written down, but I'm just going to kind of talk through how I think about CSS. So to get started, to unlock our ability to do CSS, we're going to introduce a new HTML tag. And that HTML tag is the style tag. So I'm going to zoom way in, and I usually put the style tag in the head section. It can actually go anywhere. You can put it, at the bottom, you can put it in the middle, you can put it at the top. It doesn't really matter. Can go pretty much anywhere, but most people would put it in the head because this is sort of information about the web page. So I'm going to add a style tag. So style. And glitch is nice enough to add the closing style tag. I'm going to give myself some white space in here. So I have added an HTML element or an HTML tag in here, the style tag. And right now it doesn't have any content inside of it, but so far it is just a normal HTML tag. Now, where it gets interesting is inside of this tag, I'm not actually going to put any content. I'm actually going to write in a different language. I'm going to write in a different programming language. And so the syntax or like the different symbols that you use and the rules for it are different than HTML. But that's what I'm doing in here. I'm going to be writing CSS. So let me first, maybe I'll start with like a couple of other some more content. So like this is some content and maybe one more p tag. This is some more content. Okay. So I've got some content over here in my web page, and I've got some p tags. Okay. So back to my style tag. What I'm going to do is write CSS. And so let's say my goal is to, I don't know, make all of the p tags that I just wrote red. So the way I'm going to do that is to write a CSS rule. It's called it's called a rule, and that provides a rule to the browser that specifies how to display or what style to display for the thing that you want to change. So in our case, I want to style those p tags. So I'm going to say p here. So this is called an element selector. So I'm selecting the P element on my page, and then I'm going to add an open curly brace. So on my keyboard, that's Shift, and then it's kind of to the right of the P. You don't want the square bracket, you want the curly bracket, so it looks kind of like that. And okay, Glitch is nice enough to add the closing curly bracket, so I'm going to give myself some white space, and yep. So I've got a P, and then an open curly bracket, and a closing curly bracket, and then inside of those curly brackets, I can add CSS properties and values. So the properties are the thing you want to style, or the property you want to style. So for example, color, background, font, all kinds of properties exist. And then the value is the way you want to style it. So maybe it's better to just show you an example. So what did I say? I'm going to change my p tags to red. So I want to change their color. So I type the property name color and then a colon, and then space doesn't really matter. I usually add a space, and then a value. And the value is going to depend on the property. So, different properties have different values. In this case, I want to use just red. And then a semicolon to end the line. So you are getting into like coding. HTML is coding, but HTML is a little forgiving. If you miss a closing tag, it's usually not the end of the world for many tags. With CSS, it gets a little more strict. So you need to match this syntax where you have a selector and then the curly braces, and then in here properties that are the property name, a colon, and then a property value, and then a semicolon. You need all of that, otherwise it'll break. So now if I zoom out, hopefully my p tags are indeed red. So I can change that to, other colors, green, let's say. And now they're green. Maybe I'll change it to, I don't know, blue. And now they're blue. And, I could keep going. I could change them to a bunch of different colors. I will also maybe mention, this is one property within my rule here with my selector, and then the property names and values inside of the curly braces. And I can add multiple of these properties. So let's say I wanted to, I'll keep them red. Maybe these are like warning messages or something. And I'm also going to add a border. So I'm going to give myself some white space, and on a new line, I'm going to type in the name of the property. In this case, I chose border, and then a colon, and then the value for that property. And the value of that property, again, depends on the property. So you won't always give the exact same values for each property. So in this case, borders need a couple of different things. First, I need to specify how thick the border is. So I'm going to say thin, and then you need to give it the style of the border. Is it like a dotted line, or what kind of border do you want? So I'm going to give it a solid border, and then you need to give it a color. So in this case, I want to say, I don't know, yellow won't show up. Let's see. Let's just go black. And so now if I zoom out, my p tags have both of these properties applied to them. So they are now colored in red, and they have thin, solid black borders. So I could try to change some of this. So I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's dashed maybe is the other value it could take. Yeah, okay. So different property values will result in different styles in your web page. Okay, so that is a lot already. We have created a selector, or we've created a rule which consists of a selector and then a set of properties. and the properties themselves are the property names and the property values with colons in between and then semicolons after them. Okay, so far what I've done is I've used an element selector, which selected all of the p tags on my page. So I could also add, another selector for, let's say I wanted to change all of the h1s. Right? In this case, I only have one, but I could do the same thing, h1. So I'm writing the name of the thing I want to select. In this case, it's just an element, and then open curly brace, some white space in between the curly braces, and in here I can add other properties. So here I'm going to say, I don't know, I'll stick with color. Maybe I'll change this one to orange. And there we go. So I can have multiple rules inside of my style tag as long as they all follow the CSS syntax or the language rules of CSS. Okay, so that is element selectors. We've seen a P element selector and an H1 element selector, and those are a little more straightforward than the rest of the selectors because they straight up just match the name of the tag. So if you want to style every P tag, you use a P element selector. If you want to style every LI tag, you use a LI element selector. But let's say I didn't want to style every P tag. Let's say I only wanted to style, I don't know, maybe the first two. I wanted to style this one and this one. So what do I want to do here? I want to, maybe I'll just temporarily get rid of this. So I'm going to put them back to normal. I'll keep my H1 orange. And now I wanted to style, I don't remember which two I chose, the first two, let's say. So if I used a P tag to specify a set of rules, that would style all three of them. But, I don't want to do that. I only want to style the first two. So what I can do in that case is use something called a class selector. So a class selector requires an extra step as compared to an element selector. So what I'm going to do is go down to my HTML, and I keep forgetting which two I tell you that I'm going to style, but let's just choose two. Let's choose, I don't know, the bottom two. So I'm here in my HTML. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a class attribute. It's called to my P tags, the P tags that I want to style. So to do that, I'm inside my P tag here, up here. So my cursor is like right after the P, but before the little angle bracket. So I'm going to add a space, and then I'm going to type the word class, and then an equal sign, and then double quotation marks. And Glitch is nice enough to add the second quotation mark for me, so I don't have to type that. And then in here, I'm going to give it a class. And this can be any name that I want. I could come up with my own, like blah, blah, it doesn't matter. Usually these should be a little more descriptive. I haven't thought ahead to how I want to style these, but let's say these are warnings. I don't know. These are warnings. And this by itself doesn't mean anything. I have to use this again in a second, but I'm going to do the same thing down here, and I'm going to add the same class equals warning. So I've got three P tags, and the first one does not have any classes. The second one has a single class warning, and the third one has that same class warning. So that doesn't actually change anything yet because there's nothing associated with that class yet. But to change that, I can then go up into my CSS inside my style tag, and I can use a class selector. So this is a little different than the element selector. With the element selector, it was just straight up the same as what you see in the HTML. With the class selector, there's one little difference where it starts with a dot. So I type a period, and then I type the name of my class, which I use down here, which was warning. So in my CSS, I'm going to match what I use in my HTML, dot warning, and then open curly brace, closing curly brace, and some white space in between. And now in here, I can use properties to specify the styles for only the elements that are matched by that class. So in here, what do I want my warning to be? Maybe I'll give it a border that's actually like thick, solid red. And ooh, that's scary looking. And what you should notice here is that the only elements that are styled are the two bottom ones. So that's this one and this one. And the first one is left alone because it does not have that class. So if I want to style like some of my elements in a certain way, but not all of them in that same way, then I would use a class selector. I should also, maybe I'll talk about that later. Yeah, I'll talk about that later. Yeah, okay. I'll come back to that. Don't worry. Okay, so that is class selectors in a nutshell. So now I'm going to go one step further and say, what if I only wanted to style one of my elements, like a single element? I could get away with it by just adding like a class that I only use on one element. So I could say like class equals special, and I could do the same thing and say dot special, and that would actually work. And for CSS, it's fine probably. But this idea that I'm about to introduce becomes really important when we get to JavaScript. So I'm going to mention it here. And that is the idea of IDs or identifiers. So instead of giving this single element a class, I am going to give it an ID. So it's very similar to adding a class. So I'm going to say P and then a space and then ID equals and then a quotation mark. So two quotation marks, but glitch adds the second one. And then in here, I'm going to give it a name. So maybe I'll just say special. And so now I've got three P tags. The first one has an ID of special, and then the second two have classes of warning. I'm not sure this example makes a ton of sense, but the idea is that you can specify IDs, and IDs are unique. They have to be on like a single element, and then classes are a little more relaxed. They can be on multiple elements. So now I have my ID in my HTML, but I haven't actually done anything with it in my CSS. So this still has, just the default styling. So let's say I wanted to style that. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So to select an ID or to use an ID selector, what I want to do is use the hash symbol. So on my keyboard, that's a shift and then 3. So it's like a hashtag, but in computer science, we call it a hash symbol. And then I give it the name of the ID that I used in my HTML. So I called it special. So I'm going to say hash special and then open curly brace, close curly brace. And then inside of those curly braces, this is where I add my CSS properties. So I'm running out of ideas to use to style my my stuff with. So I'll just give it maybe another, I'll give it another border because I'm not creative. Border, maybe I'll say thin, dotted, and blue. And it's a little hard to see, but it does indeed have a thin dotted blue border. Okay, so that is the three selector types that you'll generally come across. So we've got an element selector, which selects all of the elements that match that tag, and it just straight up like matches the name, just no extra symbols or anything. Then you have a class selector, and a class selector starts with a dot and then matches the name of the class attribute that you used on your HTML element. And finally, you have an ID selector, which starts with a hash and again matches the name of the ID that you gave your element. At this point, the distinction between ID and class is not super duper important. So you can probably get away with just using class selectors, but IDs do come in handy when you get to JavaScript. So I wanted to introduce this idea of giving like a unique element an ID because it will come back. But if you're like, yeah, what's the point of using a class versus an ID? right now, that's a fair enough observation, but just know that these selectors are out there. Okay, so we've now covered like how to write the fundamentals of CSS by writing these rules, they're called, and rules consist of the selector and then a set of properties. So from here, this video would be very long and very boring if the rest of it was me just naming every single property that you could possibly use. So instead, I've said before that my goal is not to teach you all of web development. It's to teach you how to learn web development or how to teach yourself web development. So let's say I wanted to find other CSS properties out there. Well, there's a few places to look. One is I've got some examples in this tutorial page here that I'm kind of basing this video off of, but more honestly, just go to your favorite search engine and type some stuff in. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to type in, I don't know, CSS properties. And sure, W3 Schools is a great reference. And in here, we've got many, 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 many properties. So they're broken down alphabetically. So I've got like accent, color, alignment properties, animation even, background, border. We saw that one. All kinds of them. I haven't even gotten to see yet. So you can read through these and like look for ones that seem interesting. The other thing you can do instead of like going from like the top of the reference and like scrolling through and clicking around is you can like hunt for the CSS properties. So let's say I wanted to align my text. I want to center my text. How would I do that? Well, I would go to a search engine and I would type in CSS center text. It's hard to see, but I just typed in CSS center text. And let's see. So the first result is W3 Schools. Here's one down here that's from MDN. These are both great resources. So I'll just click the first one. And let's see. So I've got all kinds of them. I've got this handy button that I like, this try it yourself. And oh boy, we've got all kinds of stuff. So we've got this H1 and I'll zoom in and here it is using CSS, using the style tag with a selector. This is an element selector that selects all of the H1s. This one selects all of the H2s, all of the H3s here. So you hopefully are starting to see, I don't know, this is what we just talked about, like out in the real world. But it looks like this is the property I might be looking for. Text align center. So the name of the property is text align, and then the value is center. And sure, that looks like it centers it. So let's just straight up copy paste and see what happens. So let's see, maybe I want to select, I don't know, maybe my first H1 there. So I'm going to go into that style rule and I'm going to add another style property here and I'm going to just paste it in, text align center. And I'm going to zoom out. And sure enough, the heading there is now centered. So I don't know, that process of I want to do something, I want my web page to look a certain way. How do I do that? You go to a search engine, you type in the thing you want to do, CSS, and you try stuff out. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and that's the process. Okay, so let's see. There's a couple of other things to chat through. Let's see the order I want to do them in. Another thing you might see is what's called like inline properties or inline CSS. So what that looks like is it's an attribute on an element. So let me give myself, I don't know, some more content to work with. So I'm going to add a UL. And in that, I'm going to have a couple of LIs. LI, and in here, I don't know, 1, and 2, and 3. This is just example content. You can imagine you have real content. And, I could now use different selectors on these. So I could select, every li by using an element selector. I could also add, let's say, like a class here, class equals whatever. And then I could add like, a class selector up in my style tag at the top. But the thing I want to just point out as a thing that you might see out in the wild is the inline styling technique. So I generally would say like probably you shouldn't do this, but I'm not the cops, do what you want. But what this would look like is a style attribute and then an equal sign, and then in quotation marks, you list your properties. So in this case, I don't know, color. Now I really am running out of options. Purple, and then a semicolon. And if I zoom out, indeed, it's kind of hard to see, but now my second li here is purple. And I've specified that sort of in line, in the same line as I write the HTML. You can get away with that. If I want to specify multiple, I don't use a new line. I just use a space. So I'll say border in solid purple as well, and then another semicolon. So yep. Now I have both properties specified in line. So that is a thing that you might encounter in the wilderness as you're like looking at tutorials and stuff online. It's okay, it's not illegal or anything, but it just gets a little hard to manage. So I would generally recommend sticking with keeping your CSS in one place. On that note, the other thing I want to mention is so far I've used the style tag, which is fine. Especially if you only have a single web page, then keeping it in your style tag is okay because it keeps your CSS and your HTML in one file. You don't have to switch back and forth a lot. But let's say I start to get a more complicated web page going, and now I have 5 different web pages that all do slightly different things or all contain slightly different content. But let's say I wanted to have like the same styling on multiple pages. I could just copy the same style into multiple HTML pages, but that's kind of annoying because like if I want to change it, I have to change it in like 5 different places now. So there's another way to specify your CSS, and that is in something called an external style sheet. So I would call this an internal style sheet. I don't know if that's actually the technical name for it, but this is the style element inside of the HTML file. You can also create a separate CSS file and then sort of include that in your HTML. So to do that, let me see. I don't actually know how to do this in Glitch off the top of my head, but let's see. So I'm going to create a new file, and yeah, okay. In here, I'm going to type any name I want. Usually CSS is called like style or styles dot CSS. So styles.css. I'm going to click add this file, and all right, cool. So now in my glitch project here, I've got 2 files. I've got index.html. If I click that, I go back to my HTML. If I click styles.css, now I'm in this file, which is currently empty. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything that's currently in my style tag and I want to cut it out. So now my style tag is empty and my web page goes back to the sort of default boring styles. And I'm going to go back to styles.css and I'm going to paste it in, and I might click the pretty button while I'm here. Hopefully that does stuff. Yeah, cool. So I've got my CSS rules in this separate file. I don't have a style tag in here anymore because I don't need it, because this is a CSS file. So all of the code in here is CSS. I don't need my my style tag. And nothing happened. What the heck? That's because I need to do one more thing. So my HTML file by default doesn't know that my CSS file exists. So I've just got these default styles. Even though I have classes in my HTML, I've got IDs, my HTML is still the default. And that's because I need to tell my HTML file about my CSS file. And I will be perfectly honest, I never remember this line of code. And I am not encouraging you to try to memorize any of this. Just remember that, the ideas of what we're doing exist, and then look up the actual syntax for it. So we're looking at external style sheets, and this is the line of code I'm looking for. Whenever I need it, I always just copy paste it because it's too long for me to remember. But it's the link. It's an HTML tag called link. That's the name of the HTML tag. And then it has a couple of attributes. It's got this rel attribute, and this is style sheet. It's telling the browser like what kind of thing that this content will be. Gives it a type, and then an href, which is the name of the file, or this can be a full URL if you want to. So I just copied that whole line. And the important part is that this part needs to match the name of the file that I created over in Glitch. So I might be consistent. We're going to see. So what I'm going to do is take out my style tag because I no longer need it, because I'm going to use this external style sheet. And I'm going to paste that line in, and I'm going to hope for the best. And yeah, that worked. I might click prettier. Does this handle that? No, it doesn't. Okay. I'm a little annoyed that this is too long, but it doesn't really matter. It's because I'm zoomed all the way in. Okay, so now I have moved my CSS to my external style sheet. So now I kind of have to switch back and forth. But the benefit of this is that if I had multiple web pages that are kind of linked to each other, I could include the same CSS file in all of them. And if I wanted to change, say, like the background color on every single web page, I would only need to change that in my CSS, instead of changing, every single HTML file. So it's a way to like deduplicate the code, so you don't have to change it in a ton of places. It's also kind of easier if you just have like, I'm just staring at CSS. I don't have to go back and forth in my brain between thinking about, oh, am I writing HTML or am I writing CSS? Like, I'm only writing one at a time. Okay, so there's a couple of other things I want to cover before the end of this video. Where are we on time? About 30 minutes. Okay, so I'll try to do this relatively quickly. So the two things I want to talk about are like, what does cascading mean? It's kind of an important part of CSS. It's what the C stands for. I don't know which direction it's going. It's what the C stands for. And then I want to talk about some tools that you can use to help debug CSS. So let's see. The cascading aspect of CSS is, maybe the best way to do this is to talk about like element selectors and class selectors and how they combine. So I've got right now this dot warning, and it has a thick solid red border. Let's say I wanted to make all of my p tags, I don't know, let's align them to the center, and then I want to keep this red border for the p tags that match my class. So I'm going to, I can just stick with staying in here. So I'm going to write some CSS. I'm going to write an element selector, and I'm going to match p. And then I'm going to have my opening curly brace, and then a closing curly brace. And then in here, I'm going to write my style, which I think I had above. It's text align center. And that now has aligned the p tags, all of them, to be centered. And the p elements with the dot warning class, or just the warning class, still have that red border. So for the second and third element, these now have multiple styles that are coming from multiple rules. So this is one element of what is meant by cascading, because the styles sort of cascade together to create the end result, which can be from multiple, in fact, it's often from many different style rules. So every single p tag is center aligned, And then the ones with the class have this red border. So the ones with the red border have the alignment from the p tag rule and the border from the class rule. So that is what is meant by cascading. There are other things that cascade as well, but for now, I think focusing on the idea of the styles combining to create the end result, I think is good enough. The other thing I'll mention here is, like, you might wonder, like, what if some of these disagree with each other? So let's say I have, I don't know, let's say I want to do this in a way that doesn't give it away. So I have my p tag and I have my dot warning class. Let's say I gave my p tags a color. Let's say I gave them a color of, I'm running out of colors to think of, purple. And I gave my warning class, the elements with the warning class, let's say I gave them a different color. Let's say I gave them green, just to choose kind of a pretty different color. So now I have one CSS rule that gives every p tag the color purple. And I have a different CSS rule that gives the elements with the warning class a color of green. But if you remember, in my HTML, I have p tags with the warning class. So what color should they be? And I don't know, I kind of want you to think for a second, what color do you think they should be and why? There's not really a right or wrong answer there. I just kind of want you to think about, like, what would you expect to happen? So I don't know, some valid guesses would be, well, there are p tags, so they'll be purple. You could also maybe guess that this is an error message. You know, maybe this is illegal CSS. You could maybe guess that it'll mix together and they'll be purple and green and some kind of combination. So I don't know. I encourage you to think about that for a second, and then drum roll. I'll zoom out, and what color do they end up being? They end up being green. So the first one is purple because it only has the p tag. It does not have the class. And then the elements with the class are green. And why is that? That is because, oops, where did I go? That is because CSS has this rule of specificity. So the rule that wins is whichever one is more specific. So element selectors are the least specific. So they are applied sort of, I don't know, first you can think about it. Then classes are more specific than elements. So they will win over element selectors. And then finally, ID selectors are sort of the most specific out of what we've seen so far. And so they will sort of win if they have competing elements in there. So that is a example of cascading, and then like the idea of specificity. So where did my preview go? Oh, there it is. Okay, and the last thing I want to mention is a set of tools that will become your new best friend in this class or in the tutorials that you're following. And that is your browser's developer tools. We will come back to these in probably every lesson after this. So I want to introduce them now because this is where they start to be useful. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm debating whether I want to do that here. Why not? So let's say I am, I'm looking at just any random web page over here. And actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll open this in a new window. So this is the same page, just opened in this version of it. And maybe I'll make it a little bigger. And sure. So I'm out. I'm on the internet somewhere. It could be any web page that I'm looking at. I have this ability. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to click the inspect button. Depending on your browser, this might be in a few different places. You might also have to enable this. So if you're using like Safari and you don't see this, do a Google search of Safari enable like inspect menu. So you might have to enable it. But once you have it in this right-click menu, the other way is through your menu up here. If you go down here and then to, again, it's kind of different for each browser, but it might be under something called Developer Tools or Web Developer Tools. That's another place to get to it. But either way, I'm going to right-click and inspect. And that brings up a window, and this window might be in a different place for you, so it might actually end up showing here by default. And my face is going to be in the way. Let me turn off my face for a second. So I'm still here. I didn't go anywhere. But what I've opened is this menu on the right side here, and I can I zoom into this? Not really. There's a zoom button here. Not really. That's a little annoying, but hopefully you can see it in the video. But over here, I am seeing the, oh, there you go. There's how I zoom in. I'm seeing the HTML that resulted in the page. So I can see what code created the web page that I'm looking at. And you can do this for literally any web page. So I can see the H1, I can see the P with the ID, I can see Ps with warnings, I see the UL tags down here. I see all of this. And I also see sort of right below that, down here, if you can see my mouse, I can see the CSS for it. And I can actually change any of this. So this is sort of like a little hacker man kind of thing. So if I click the inspect button, it'll sort of jump me here. I can actually change this. So I can double click here and say like, I hacked your web page. And it shows up here. It doesn't, change the actual code. Like it doesn't change this for anybody else. I'm just changing it in my browser temporarily. If I refresh, it'll go away. It's not permanent. So you can feel free to click around and change anything you want in here. But where this becomes really handy is when you're messing with CSS. So let's say I wanted to play with, other properties and other values. I can edit them directly in my browser. So let's say I wanted to play with different options for text align. So I'll say text align, and it has this nice like sort of autocomplete feature, the site where I can see my options. So that helps me understand like what I can choose, and I'll type a colon, and then in here it gives me the options for that property. So I can either click them or I can type them. I can also use like the up and down arrows to like go through them one by one. So this is centered, this is end, this is inherit, these are all of my options. And this is super handy when you're messing with CSS. So let's say I wanted it to be right. The one thing I will mention here is this is not saved anywhere. So if I wanted to like sort of move this over to my project, I would have to like copy this back into my actual code. So I'd have to copy it in there. But this is, your developer tools here are very handy when you're dealing with CSS. But if I refresh, all of my changes are gone. It's not permanent. So make sure that anything that you want to change, you eventually port back over to your code. Okay, so that is, where'd my face go? Do you really need to see my face? Probably not, but here I am. So this was CSS. You now know how to write CSS, including like element selectors, class selectors, and ID selectors. You know how to add attributes to your HTML. So things like the ID attribute or the class attribute. We used the style tag at first, which is okay. But then we switched to using the external style sheets, which is probably better to use, but it's kind of up to you. We also talked about how to find new properties, which is go to a search engine and look through resources like W3 Schools, MDN, and you can use your browser tools to like try different things out. You can also inspect other people's websites. So if I wanted to know like, oh, how did they do that? So I don't know, maybe I'll go to a web page. I don't know why this is always the example that I choose, but I'll go to the Wikipedia article for cat. And let's say I wanted to know like, I don't know, how did they make, how did they make this? That's probably just an image. Like how did they make All right, maybe Wikipedia is a bad example because it's just text. But let's see if there's any example. But whatever, I'll just kind of click one. I'll just inspect it, and I can see here is the code that they used, and here is them using an image tag with a class. You can't really see that maybe, but it has a class attribute, and then that class attribute is styled with CSS. So this is a goofy example because it's Wikipedia, but you can inspect any web page on the internet to see how they did stuff. So that's another way you can find CSS. And last and not least, we talked about the idea of cascading and properties sort of clashing with each other, and the winner being whichever one is most specific or in the most specific selector. All right, I will leave it there. In the next video, I will use all of this to like actually work through an example project, but this hopefully sets up sort of the concepts that are used in CSS. But really where it gets interesting is when you actually start using it. So that'll be the next video, and I will see you in that one. Until then, happy coding.